We are live. And you know what I realized? We have not told our Plot Goblin listeners the book that we read after Morningstar. So this is going to be a complete shock unless I drop it into the community chat that we've read this.
Yeah. Interesting.
Should we do a reveal?
I mean, it's going to be the title of the podcast.
That's true. Well, on the last episode, you and I got to the very end and we're like, well, do we read Sword of Kaigen? Do we read The Will of the Many? And then it was clear that you, like, just based on your temperament, and you were ready for
Well,
SOK.
I picked it up 15 minutes after you left, and it took you 2 weeks to pick it up, so I was ready.
Yeah, I was finishing that Dresden book, and so it took me a little bit to transition, but here we are, Sword of Kaigen,
ML
Wang.
Kaigen.
And
did we determine if ML Wang is a man or a woman?
It's a lady.
It's a lady.
Yeah, I did a little bit of digging yesterday or the day before just to get an idea of what her background was, and this was self-published.
Interesting.
Did you know that?
Give your knob just a tad towards you. Yeah.
Okay.
That's much better.
But yeah, this is a self-published book.
Oh,
novel, which is really awesome for her to have had this much success.
Yeah.
And the other thing that's interesting about ML Wang is she doesn't really even read fantasy
at
all.
Wow.
She knows almost no fantasy or sci-fi.
That's
and
cool.
most of what she's read is history.
Well, and you know what? I can pick up on that right away. And that, that's interesting because aside from there being magic, it's very, historical.
Yeah, there is.
It's rooted in tradition and history and culture versus fantasy, magic system.
Well, funny that you should mention that. Let's give the readers an idea of what we're going to talk about, and then I'll transition to a photo, screenshot that I sent you. But today, Wes and I are going to review the first half of Sword of Kaigen. So we stopped right at the end of chapter 16, which is the perfect literal halfway point in the novel, but also right at the very edge of what seems to be a climax of the whole book.
Right, for sure.
Which is really unusual because unless this is sort of a false front where there's some sort of second lingering climax with some very quick rising and falling action in the next 300 pages, then what we have here is an unusual situation where the books is going to hit the climax at the center and have a ton of falling action.
I have
That's what
no
it seems
idea.
to be. So,
well, and I think on the first page, before you get into the actual story, it says on there this was supposed to be a trilogy and is going to be a standalone. And it's so well received, so I have a hard time thinking that people loved it with 300 pages of resolution.
Well, it either is pure resolution in the last 300 pages, but I don't know how she would cram in some sort of, just based on her writing style and how diligent she was.
Yeah.
This is a very character-driven, so I do have some ideas, though, on how she could have a banger second climax.
Oh, okay.
Which I could talk about.
Yeah, I'm very interested in that.
Yeah, I'm thinking today, if you want to pull up that text, I'll read one of them. We are going to talk about the first half of the book, maybe the characters that we like, some of the scenes we enjoyed, and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
We'll just kind of go from there. But one of the things that I was reading about in her blog, this was an interview with medium.com. I don't know who that is, but you mentioned you felt the historical sort of context of this novel and that she had rooted it in maybe not actual history, but some sort of remnant of it, like historical fiction. It almost reads like in addition to being very much a fantasy book that sort of steals from Avatar a little bit and some other things, it does have this historical fiction element, and it turns out that's true.
Oh, yeah, because, I mean, if you wipe away the magic, it's just, an old school village that's being met with modern day challenges. And we haven't really hit that yet, but if you wipe away the magic, it's just some far off village in the mountains that ends up getting in a fight.
Yeah, that's true. You don't really know too much about Duna, this world, do you? But yeah, it is. One of the things it says here is if you're wondering what piece of history shaped the plot of the Sword of Kaigen, you'd have to research the quote unquote Nanjing Massacre during the Second Sino-Japanese War. The same event inspired parts of the Poppy War by RF Kwang. And she basically says that the The difference here is that the power structures in the Sword of Kaigen are flipped. So this is based on an actual massacre in the Second Sino-Japanese War, which I want to say I was reading was in like the 30s. I could be wrong on that. But it said the underlying premise of Planet Duna, this is her saying this in a blog, the underlying premise of Planet Duna is that it takes the racial hierarchies of our own history and flips them, giving the reader a chance to walk a mile in someone else's shoes. In Theonite, so I learned that this is a prequel to something that's a young adult series called the Theonite series.
Interesting.
So that's what this actually is a prequel. And maybe she intended the prequel to be a trilogy.
Sure.
And this is more of an adult book, whereas the Theonite series is supposedly more young adult for 12 and up audiences. Sure. But it says here that in Theonite, Europeans are the Haitians. They've been colonized by West Africans, which are the Fonyakalu. And in Sword of Kaigen, the Chinese, which are the Ranganese, do some genocide in Japan, which is Shirojima Kaigen, Northern Kaigen, ruled by an imperial Korea, which is Jungsang Kaigen. So she very much was inspired by that actual event, only she flipped the narrative around.
Right.
Yeah, which is really
instead
interesting.
of Europe colonizing West Africa, the opposite, and instead of...
So that's kind of interesting. I would need to learn a little bit more into that to better understand how she... what she pulled from actual history and what she flipped and what she didn't. But I just thought it was so interesting that she did pull from historical fiction, and that's pretty much what she reads.
Yeah.
She said that her inspiration for this world was the Theonites, which is that young adult thing I was talking about. And she said her inspiration for that was like Avatar meets Harry Potter.
Yeah, sure.
And so that's more young adult, and this is her adult version.
Oh, interesting. Well, and, part of the reason that I say history, tradition, and culture is that she really does capture the traditional Japanese, like, home life. And I'm not Japanese. I only know what I've read and seen in movies, but she does a great job of capturing the challenges of bringing honor to your family. And so, when you first start reading this, until you realize that there's magic in it, you've really just got a very traditional family that their son learns that there's a whole nother world out there. And what he thought was just very old school. So
yeah, and you're right. You don't see a lot of magic at that point, but here's what they tease. She teases you with. So this is a very character-driven plot where, yes, you hit on some of those key themes of family. So I actually listed some of what I felt were the key themes so far, which I put in here, like hierarchy, nationalism, propaganda, ethnocentrism, which, is mostly coming from Takeru and Takashi and just the lore and tradition of being the Sword of Kaigen. So there's a lot of belief that they are better than the rest of the world, which is part of why they're not adopting the
chosen
new ways,
ones. Yes,
the new modern technologies and whatnot. Some of the other ones were like sacrifice, nobility, conserving culture, honor, tradition, identity, and self-discovery, duty. Like there's a sense of duty, and that's what I was thinking about Misaki, because you learn that she was not this docile housewife. She was at this school, right? And that was called Daybreak Academy.
Daybreak.
And she was there kicking ass and seemed to really shuck the patriarchal hierarchy and the norms. And she came from a family, right, that would have definitely required that of her, and yet she goes, we know nothing really about Daybreak other than a couple of her friends that were trying to teach her to have more of a moral compass than maybe she did.
Yeah.
And she was kind of a loose cannon.
Well, her and her friends have this like superhero vigilante like club.
I wonder if that's the Theonites. Like,
oh, it could be.
Do you think?
Because
I have no idea. I'm just totally speculating.
She's in this vigilante type. The first time you really meet her in her, outside of being the matriarch in this family, flashback, she's in this like a fight in an alley with her friends doing some vigilante stuff, and it comes out that she's like, no, I would kill for you, and her friends are like, I don't think you need to
just
kill
keep it
anybody. I
easy,
don't think you need to
Misaki.
kill anybody. Like,
Yeah,
it's
we're
fine.
just-
Like, we're just beating people up. We're like Batman. Batman doesn't kill people.
Right. It's so she does have this sort of unhinged
She's a little
subtlety
unhinged.
to
Yeah.
her. But what is so interesting, and we can talk about what we think could happen in, the falling action of this book, or maybe a secondary climax. But what happened to her? Why? We don't know yet what transpired in Daybreak between her, Aline, Robin. Like,
Yeah.
that was some rising action that was happening, and it keeps cutting back to this older version of her that's so subdued, so downtrodden by the patriarchy, for whatever reason, has handcuffed herself to Takeru. And I know that there's house politics and family politics, and it made sense for her family to be with the Matsudas, which were the strongest.
Right.
But not her. Like, what happened to her for her to decide, hey, I'm going to shuck that version of myself, which is more true to me, and then be this cog?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I remember reading that she did it for her kid, or that she married Matsuda because
She wanted to give
she
him
wanted
kids?
to give her family the best chance
best
of
bloodline.
success. So
But that doesn't seem like the version of her we're seeing in school. In
no,
Daybreak.
yeah, right.
So
like, she
something
doesn't need
happened.
anybody else.
Yeah, and I remember at the beginning it was saying that her parents allowed her to go to Daybreak, which I think was in Yama, maybe, or
Yeah, Yama, because that's where the New Woos are from, the
well,
quote
I know-
unquote earthbenders, and so, or the
There's-
wind, the airbenders,
Oh
essentially.
yeah, the Fonyaka.
Fonyaka.
You know what's interesting? There are no earthbenders in her world, which I was a little bit.
Well, the Chijaka.
Those are fire. So Tajaka is a Theonite with the ability to control fire. The Fanya are control air. Hijaka is water.
Yeah.
And then there's Fank.
That's like a
Atsuki,
subgroup. That's like a
super strong.
yeah,
So then the rest are subgroups.
yeah.
So it's just kind of, I noticed that. I'm like, well, I was trying to think about what could be in the rest of this book.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering if there are some untapped Theonite
Yeah,
powers,
yeah.
because they do seem to be able to come up with things over time that are very rare. For example, the Whispering Blade, or the Soul Pole from the Fonyaka. Like, over time, very few of them are able to transcend.
Yeah, everybody's special families have the special ability, if you will, like in video games, and the ones that have a special ability are the ones that are the ruling family of the genus, if you will.
Yeah, but I was wondering, like, yeah, maybe.
And so
I doubt that Earth is going to
back to the
become a part of
Yama
this, but-
thing. They are like the bad guys in this, in the eyes of the Sword of Kaigen. And so she keeps talking about her college roommate at Daybreak that was
Ranganese,
a Fonyaka.
though, I thought the Ranganese are the ones that they are really upset with.
Yeah.
Well, I think the Fonyaka in general is a type of Theonite that they disagree with. fundamentally.
Right. Yeah, sure.
And actually, one of my favorite parts of this, and I'm curious if you cared about it, it was when Grandma Kotetsu was telling Mamoru and Kwang Chu Lee the story of basically how the modern day Matsudas became so close with the Numu and those sword
yeah.
yeah, and that story was really interesting. And so Mamoru's in the background just questioning if it's real or not. But one of the things that they mention in here, I think it was in that story that she talks about the Fonyaka and just their frustration, or actually that might have been separate. Kotetsu, the main guy who taught him how to create a sword.
Yeah, that would be
him.
That would be his uncle. That would be his uncle.
I don't think it's his blood uncle, right? Because Takashi and stuff is in the Matsuda family, but he does have they have an alliance, basically, that was crafted very early on with the Numus.
Yeah, and if I'm recalling correctly, it was the... Oh, man. It's like when they started their school. Oh man, I'm totally blanking now. I felt like the Nuwus, they were able to make the swords.
Oh, here it
and
is.
the Matsudas were like, oh, like we can't. Oh, careful.
Oh, with that.
Talking to your mic.
Hello.
Yeah, we're good.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, so the Nuwus were basically in this religion. So that's the other part of this. So actually, I'll read this story because I think it is helpful in setting the scene for what had happened. Because from this Grandma Kotetsu, what had happened is, remember, Kwang broke his arm falling down that hill.
Right.
And, Mamoru had got them out of that situation, but saw the fighter jet that was made out of that Sicilian
glass, pretty much, yeah.
which blew his mind and just further helped solidify that, in fact, this worldview that he had that was propaganda from Kaigen was incorrect. And his mom had basically just said as much, and then so was Chuli, kept on telling him, and then sure enough, he broke his arm, so he takes them to the Numu, who are not very sophisticated medically, but did mend his arm. And while Kwang's getting his arm mended, the grandma tells the story of basically how they ended up forming an alliance with the Numu. And what she says is, there were, way back when it was the very, like, Takeru the First, they call him. So the first Takeru. There was Philea missionaries that came to Kaigen from Yama and Disa. And they brought new technologies and ways to look at the world. And a lot of the Shirojima in Kaigen embraced this new religion, including the Matsuda's nearest neighbor, which was the Yukino house. But the Matsuda patriarch at the time, he rejected that religion, the Philea religion, going as far as beheading all of those mercenaries. And then Lord Yukino Izumi led a retaliation and burned the Matsuda castle down, and it killed everybody except for Matsuda Takeru the First, who was a kid that was 12 at the time, basically. And Kotetsu, a Kotetsu man named Kinzao, found Takeru and raised him as his own son. And then Takeru was raised under the rule of Yukino Izumo's Philea state. And despite what happened to his family, he was able to listen to the missionary Finawu and learn the value of Philea. He took to the forge. He trained with the Hija swordsmen, all in disguise. And then he grew in his skills and basically confronts Yukino once he's an adult and says, hey, I'm the heir to the Matsuda house. You thought you had killed off my entire bloodline, but you didn't. I'm going to challenge you to battle. And he scoffs and laughs in his face. And then he's like, you know what? I'll battle you unarmed. And so Yukino took him on, basically. And he had the best forged sword in all of the world, basically, by the Numu. And Kenzu basically said, don't do this. Don't do this. There's no way you're going to be able to fight him in hand-to-hand combat with the sword that he has. And that's when Takeru the First says, hey, you may have given Yukino Dono a great sword, but the weapon you gave me is greater than metal. You've given me the knowledge of the blade itself. And he was the first person to use the whispering blade. And it killed Yukino in cold blood. And so that's when Matsuda basically won, and no one dared challenge him except for Yukino's son, and he was the 12-year-old boy, I guess, and his name was Hayashi. And the boy said he wouldn't allow Takeru to execute the town's Finawu or destroy their Philea temples. And then Takeru was moved by the kid's bravery and said, you know what? I'm wise enough not to repeat my father's mistakes. Despite my power, I don't wish to rule through fear. And he kept the religious temple standing. He incorporated Philea law into his rule, eventually becoming a devout Phea himself, and then created new laws that allowed the Kotetsu Numus that tied them to the Matsuda family, binding their houses in loyalty for all the time to come. So that's basically why they have the relationship with these Numu. And then also what was crazy is Takeru then let Heizi return to Yukino to become the ruler there instead of killing him, and then married that kid's older sister, which was the guy's daughter that he had just killed. And her, so married Yukino Izumi's oldest daughter, and her name was Mitsuki, to ensure peace between the houses. So that's pretty crazy background.
Yeah, for sure.
And so that's why they have this complex relationship with the Numu. even though I think based on that religion, it's a little bit unusual.
Mm-hmm.
But, and you can see here what a numu means.
Yeah,
It's the smiths of Kafo. So craftsmen, artists, architects, engineers.
Got it.
Metalworking.
Yeah.
So, but I thought that was a interesting story that this old grandma was passing down that seemed pretty truthful.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and that's what I like about this book is that as you're getting some just kind of run-of-the-mill storytelling, then they take a step back and you get this very in-depth history lesson just by way of grandma telling a story.
Mm-hmm.
And ML Wang does a good job of not needing 200 pages to set the scene or build the world. She just does it when grandma's got Kwang on her lap.
Mm-hmm. And Kwang, too, at that time was kind of, propelling the story along. He was interested in the story, but also was kind of doubting it. But what I thought was most interesting about that story is think about what happened. Takeru the First showed a ability to perspective change and paradigm shift.
Mm-hmm.
And his father rejected that religion and beheaded those mercenaries, right? The guy who was, the Yukino guy who was the ambassador, who had decided that religion was good, another very prominent house, killed his entire family.
Yeah.
And then rather than being vengeful, he does kill the Yukino, but spares his son, marries the guy's daughter, embraces the religion himself. Yeah. So he truly does transcend the mores and a lot of the cultural requirements at the time, right?
Yeah.
And he was able to deviate from his father, which Takeru Mamoru's dad does not.
Mm-hmm.
So what was a very flexible beginning to repowering the Matsuda name has become very stoic again.
Sure, yeah.
And
then you've got Mamoru
mimicking
the same perspective and really actions at that point.
Except he's finally having a breakthrough. And he has this breakthrough where he's like, maybe I'm being lied to.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a page, actually, where I feel like, is it Mamoru or... I say Mamoru, so it's going to be hard for me to change. But I feel like he made an important revelation on learning. You need to learn from people that aren't like you, similar to Takeru the First, because he says to Misaki, he said... Misaki was talking to Mamoru and says, but that doesn't mean you can't listen. You can learn a great deal listening to people with different experiences from your own. A Jesselie once told me, listening never made any man dumber, but it's made a lot of people smarter. She waved a hand. That wasn't a very good translation, I promise. It sounds more poetic and Yamaniki. And then Mamoru says, like Matsuda Takeru the First, ... And Misaki says, what? Misaki didn't follow his train of thought, but he seemed to have reached some kind of revelation. He learned from people who weren't like him, even though he was a Koro. He grew up with blacksmiths. He was willing to learn from them and the foreign missionaries, even the son of his greatest enemy, and in the end it made him stronger. For a moment, Misaki could only stare at her son. She had never thought of Matsuda history that way, in any way that related to her own experience. And here, her bloodied, sleep-deprived 14-year-old boy just connected two pieces of the world she never would have thought to fit together. So I do think he could be Takeru the First reincarnate.
For sure.
That really helps them meld their society into this modern world while still preserving the elements of it that made it great and that make it traditional.
Yeah, and now you're going even beyond that when he's taking Kwang's perspective and now bringing technology into it with the guy, he's
with
got an
towers.
iPhone or whatever and the towers.
Yeah.
And so, I think that's probably a decent segue into, obviously we have to talk about the battle that happens and how we get there, but, I guess we can wait, but I'm very interested to know how technology plays in the back half of this.
Well, let's talk about that because there's, we ended at a major cliffhanger where Mamoru is in shambles.
Well, so I think it's probably worth it to talk about the battle now, don't you think?
Sure. Yeah, I think the battle, I think that was where things really got interesting for me. What preceded the battle, a scene that I really liked was when Misaki had decided to listen to Mamoru, and rather than stopping his curiosity, indulged it at one point and basically confirmed that, yes, the Kaigenese government is lying to you.
Yes.
And it blew his mind. And they're watching the sunrise that morning in the sunroom, right? And that was the calm before the storm, where you knew that he was fundamentally transformed, but also so was she. She was slowly shifting from once she was a fighter to then being this docile housewife to deciding to reclaim her initial identity again. So she's going through a third transformation.
Yeah.
And it happens right at that scene, which was great.
I do love when she officially pulls the veil.
Yeah.
And then,
and he's just gutted.
She transforms both of them. And then actually this is it right before that. Mamoru gets in a fight with his dad because Mamoru
it was either right before or right after, but
yeah.
But yeah, because his dad hears him talking like that, because he basically, once his mind was open, confronts his dad Takeru boldly.
Yeah, and it's like, Mamoru, take it back.
What a baller! I wish I could have talked to not that my dad was as hard nosed.
Well, today it would be like telling a die-hard Democrat or Republican that you are absolutely insane and like you're just.
Well, also Takeru,
so much propaganda there.
Takeru can.
He's the greatest warrior on the planet.
Well, and he has an anger issue.
Yeah.
Even though it seems like it's somewhat reserved, I mean, this guy is so bought into the dogma and the propaganda and what he stands for as a Matsuda, and what his whole personal identity is founded on a lie. And at some point, he's brainwashed himself to believe it. And so I imagine while Mamoru is sort of, I think he knows. He knows Misaki's past. He knows. I think he doesn't want Mamoru to believe it, and it's prickling at his own inability to be stronger than the dogma.
Well, I think if you're indoctrinated from that perspective, you have to have some belief that what you're believing is for the greater good.
Otherwise, why did you do all this?
Yeah, so you've got to believe that it's at least for the greater good. And so
Mamoru's spitting all over that story.
Right. And so he's literally squashing
and
beliefs.
He's 14.
An entire culture and tradition. And so there's got to be some, evil that Takeru's like, honestly, maybe it's better that we just live in the mountains and don't deal with these guys.
Yeah.
So
maybe he is trying to really preserve, maybe he is trying to save his family.
Yeah.
From a greater evil.
Right.
That he thinks is looming. Yeah, you're right. A lot of it might come from love.
And that could be a villain of, an actual enemy, or this could be a story about the illness that is technology on everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And so I do love the scene where Takeru and Mamoru fight and he just like keeps picking on him and he doesn't do a good job, and then Misaki comes in and starts telling him what he did wrong, and then that's the first time that she officially betrays Takeru and walks into the arena to teach Mamoru how to fight.
And Takeru wasn't there while she was doing that, but that was a major transgression.
Right.
And I also really respected I'm gonna start saying Mamoru now because
whatever you want.
But I really respected his open-mindedness, because he's just learned all this stuff relatively recently. I know Kwang Chu Lee had probably for maybe a couple weeks had gone by they were studying and he was kind of opening his mind, but that's just your peer. It's very different when your mom is not even slowly peeling back the layers, but is basically showing this alternate universe of herself in real time. I mean, that must have, but he was so able to roll with the punches, so to speak, and listen to her, actually, even though, you know what I mean? So I just thought that was another moment of just showing that there's a very real patriarchy, and there is a lot of misogyny happening in this book, because it was core to the culture of how it worked, right? Of how you communicate to these male leaders, right? But for Mamoru to, in that moment, not be so jaded by all of that and say, whoa, that was actually a great move that you showed me.
Right.
I'm going to take your advice immediately. He didn't even second guess it.
Yeah, for sure.
So I liked that she made him this open-minded sort of character that does question the fact that she shouldn't be doing these things, but at the same time doesn't allow that it doesn't prevent him from still learning from her.
Right, for sure. Now, so there's that happens, and then something else happens, but that's when they're having their...
Right after that, shortly after that is Takashi comes over and wants to get drunk because he wants Mamoru to lead up the academy, basically, and take the place of the sword trainer.
Takashi
wants Takeru to take
over.
Takeru,
yeah.
And so Uncle Takashi's slinging back some sake.
Yeah.
Getting hammered. And then shortly after that is when they feel a tinge in the air. Or no, what happens shortly after that is Misaki gets a letter. And it's a letter from her past, basically telling her...
The roommate. I think the college roommate.
I don't remember which one
it was.
It's
her family that's like, hey, if you're still there...
There's a war
GTFO.
coming.
GTFO.
That's when Takeru's not listening to her. And she's trying to explain it. And then she goes full mother bear on him.
Yeah. She hits him with the death needle and makes his arm go numb.
Yeah.
And then locks the door.
What a G.
Yeah.
That's this other dark side of her. That just the
blood needle.
Yeah, she hits him with that blood needle, and very effective.
Mm-hmm.
That was what I thought was. There was a couple of differences between this and bending that I thought was really sharp, and that was one of them.
Yeah,
like traditional, because there's blood bending and stuff like that in the Avatar series, and blood
and in this book as well.
Well, yeah, of course, but I think the blood needle is a part of that manipulation, but it's different. It's similar, but I feel like she did some slightly interesting things.
I like the special ability where it's like once you've mastered it, you get.
And so few people, and it's just her family line, really. The Tsunos or whatever, that's the ones that are bending.
Susuno. Yeah.
They're the ones that are known for blood manipulation, but the Matsudas and the other houses kind of frown on it. They don't look at that as something that you should do.
It's kind of dirty. And even in Avatar, they view it as bad.
It is bad because you're puppeting them, I guess, but it also is good for congealing wounds.
Right.
And in battle, it makes a lot of sense. And frankly, I imagine that's what's going to save Mamoru's poor little tummy.
Yeah, oh, for sure. Yeah, I mean, he's literally gutted.
Yeah, so I think the blood manipulation is good. But, you were, even when Mamoru was a child, Misaki did teach him some things, but I was really saddened at times where she was like, when did my son grow up so much? Like, she was definitely an absent parent because she was living in the past and also living in regret for the present moment that she had brought herself into.
And just being forced to bear children. So she was in a room
to bear
forever.
Children, she had several miscarriages. She was not treated... She wasn't treated with the necessary level of empathy that you should in those moments. And she was being used, right? She's more of a vessel than she was a partner.
Right.
And she was jealous maybe of
her sister-in-law. That's just very kind of free-spirited and is married to the uncle.
Takashi, yeah. And they had it, and she's like, why couldn't I? So she was just... And I don't have too much sympathy for that.
Yeah.
Because... She had that in her always to be more. And in fact, Uncle Takashi even says that on the battlefield at one point when Mamoru's trying to use the blood healing on him when he got that slash on his side. He even makes the comment, because he's like, where did you learn this? And he's like, I wish I knew Misaki better.
Yeah.
So even he in that moment was willing to potentially embrace these other facets of her that she had walled off.
Right.
So some of the prison she created was her
self-imposed.
For
sure, yeah.
Somewhat. Now, I think Takeru was definitely a threat
that
prevented it.
It is a little bit of what's the Stockholm syndrome, where you're kidnapped and you end up falling in love with the kidnapper.
But she did it too. I imagine we're going to learn more in the latter 300 pages for what happened at Daybreak. And just in general, that she slid back in. Because I kind of felt that there was this burgeoning admiration and, dare I say, romantic interest with that Robin.
What? Maybe. Because when the Nuwu break into the house in the middle of the battle, I don't think that's the Fonyakalu. When she kills those three guys, I I don't think that's the first time she killed somebody. So maybe at Daybreak she finally kills somebody.
She made it. Oh well,
and that's what makes her realize that like, oh, I should never have done that. I got to get out of this vigilante game.
Well, maybe she had bloodlust or she got too close. Because I think that she made a comment that as if she made this comment when she punctured someone's organ for the first time that she thought it would be more satisfying.
Yeah.
And it wasn't for her
Yeah.
because she was used to purposefully missing organs and missing certain, just to not mortally wound, but wound deeply. And so she made it seem like it was her first time killing, but
yeah, I am recalling that. So maybe like one of her other
she might have
partners
gone too far, though.
maybe have killed somebody,
or maybe
or
implicated Robin or something, and Robin got killed because that was her whole thing. Is like I'm gonna do what it takes to save you, and so I have to imagine then that maybe she did lose them.
Yeah,
and it was her fault, and she was being too aggressive.
Or maybe she could have killed somebody and she didn't, and so
and she's running away from a past that she isn't fully resolved.
Right.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Sure.
That could definitely be something.
So then, ultimately, the they get there's a tinge in the air, and they're like, "Oh, that's wind."
They feel it coming.
That's wind.
Meanwhile, Takeru's just
one arm,
and he's
limp,
and he is
fuming.
Oh, he has blood in his eyes. He was gonna absolutely.
He
KO
pretty much
her.
busts out of that door to be like, "Misaki, I'm gonna kill you," and then at that moment, they realize that the bells go off or whatever, and the Fonyaka have made landfall, like D-Day, and they're coming up the hill.
Here's my question, and I can't quite remember this, but part of me was thinking that not all Fonyaka are Ranganese. They could be other things, right? I'm just trying to remember. Are these? This is not like. Because the Great War or whatever that happened that they teach about at the beginning, that was from the Ranganese, right? Marching north, and there was a lot of bloodshed, even though the Kaigenese Empire covered it up, right? I was just trying to remember that, like, obviously they're pissed. These airbenders are not okay.
Yeah, right. So there's something for them to attack this lonely mountain.
Do you think it's because, well, the Sword of Kaigen obviously did a lot of damage that was underreported to the Kaigenese people who think that they are the bastion of truth and all that's good in the world.
They've never done anything wrong ever.
Right. And so I wonder, it seems like they're not that caught off guard though. Like why wouldn't they know whether or not you're allies with somebody?
Right.
Would that almost be, I guess, like, or is it kind of like North Korea attacking somebody? It's like, I guess at some point you knew
you just knew at some point they were going off the rails.
That's what I'm trying to figure out is why is there so much animosity with the Fonyakulu. It does remind me of a passage that on page 307 302 where Kotetsu does elaborate on the Fonyakulu and why he thinks they're corrupt. The long story short, remember when he was forging his first ever sword and he kept getting afraid of the fire and would throw water at it?
Right.
And basically this guy was teaching him, Kotetsu, was teaching him was that there's this ultimate balance between water and fire, but that air is the antithesis of these things. It only breeds negativity. And he said, based on what I know of wind, what it does to fire and oceans and empires, I would say that Fonya is the power of chaos. Anyone who wields the power of wind, whether he realizes or not, is a sort of demon.
Yeah.
So there is sort of this growing, well, not even growing, but there is sort of this, anti-Fonya kind of view within the Kaigenese, at least in Kaigen. But there must be something else for them to have attacked like that.
Yeah.
That I would imagine. What was the impetus of that?
Yeah. And this is why what I was talking to you beforehand is that I have no idea where this book could go at the halfway mark. I have at least an idea that, well, actually, let me say this. I don't even know how Mamoru and family would leave Kaigen if they wanted to. And so, like, I feel like this entire battle's got to happen in Mamoru's home turf.
Yeah. Well, they're definitely not going to keep the fight going. They're going to be decimated.
Yeah.
right? They're not going to have manpower.
Yeah, I
don't
mean, I
think.
guess half these villages are gone. So,
Oh,
like,
yeah,
I'd be really interested to know how, like, Mamoru's probably got to leave the Sword of Kaigen.
So I have a couple of ideas. You want to shift to that?
Yeah.
Because obviously the fight scenes were cool, and Misaki is a badass.
Yeah.
And one of my favorite scenes.
The dragon was sick.
The dragon was sick, dude.
sick.
And then Takashi's explosive Nayama at his death.
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
all
yeah.
of that, which I think is interesting, is Nayama
It's
is
like a dying star.
It's all the potential energy in the universe, basically,
Mhm.
and that's what you can. So there's this greater field that you could have strong Nayama, right, where you can pull it in, and that's where like your powers come from or whatever. But he had godlike powers,
right.
and it exploded and speared everybody like an exploding star.
Sick.
That was sick.
Very sick.
I really liked that scene, and I did like Misaki's fight in the kitchen.
Yes.
And what an odd setting. Like, you don't get a lot of magic books, fantasy books in a kitchen.
With crazy hand-to-hand combat in a hut.
And even there was one point where she considered grabbing the kitchen knives, and I go, okay, this is John Wick.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
if you would have grabbed
right.
a kitchen knife,
Yeah, right.
this is no longer like a fantasy book.
Right.
but-
No, this is not Mistborn. This is true hand-to-hand combat in a village
But that
hut.
was cool. That was unusual, right?
Yeah.
I wasn't expecting that, and it was really interesting. And one of the things that I did like is Wang's ability to make you empathize with the creativity and the cleverness of their fighting style, because they're always thinking, especially Mamoru, he's considering what happened earlier in the fight, how they behaved, what were their first moves going to be, how did they counteract it, even at a psychological
thinking
level.
ahead for sure.
And that led to Mamoru's sort of downfall when it turns out that guy, the Dragon Slayer, had actually
knew that he was gonna think
nothing.
Yeah, right.
But
which is funny because that's how oh my god, that's how Vin takes out the Lord Ruler.
Oh yeah,
Marsh. She takes out Marsh because he knows one ahead, and she thinks nothing, and that's how she takes him down.
And she anticipates it. But I had some ideas on what could happen.
Yeah, I want to hear them.
So I have one harebrained one, and then I have what I really think could happen.
Sure.
What I really think could happen is this. I think you got a lot of falling action coming. And what I know is that Mamoru, he's young, he's naive, he's unproven. I know that Takeru he's stubborn, he's a traditionalist, he needs to evolve. Mm-hmm. And I know that Misaki, she has a very storied past. She's hardened over years of conforming in a family and society she doesn't feel comfortable or useful in. She needs to find herself again, adjusting for the fact that she has a family and responsibilities to uphold. And can she find that winning formula between staying true to who she is and who she needs to be for her family? Can she let go of past resentments and learn how to enact proper change without destroying this life that she's built? So I think that you're just going to get a lot of character development. So I suspect you're going to get backstory of the book, the remainder of the book, with Daybreak and Robin and Aline and what happened to make her agree with such an unfitting life cycle, and just the gap between those two realities that she's living must be rife with action and answers. So I think we're going to get a lot of that. And I was also thinking, this is just, let's just pretend that's a world where all three live. Right. You have Takeru, you have Misaki, and you have Mamoru, and it's more them sort of coming to terms with this new world. Or maybe Misaki dies. And
Mamoru dies.
Well, no, one of the ideas I had was Misaki dies, and Mamoru finds her sword, her the Zalazan sword, and he masters the art of wielding it, basically. And maybe there was this sort of connection that he had with Misaki that allowed him to wield it in maybe even a more powerful way.
Yeah.
And then he's embodying her best features and maintaining her legacy while also bridging the empathy that she lacked in life and filling the deficits.
Yeah, very interesting.
So I thought that would be cool. I don't see a world where Mamoru dies.
No,
or
I see a world where he cuts Takaru's head off.
She is
How
on the cover,
poetic
though.
that would be.
I wonder, though, I think that at his heart, I think Takeru is just a subject of his environment.
Misunderstood.
So I think it would be unusual for a fight to end in death for Takeru unless it was to protect Misaki. And maybe that's what this becomes, is this sort of internal family battle.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, I would be very happy with that.
And the last thing that I was thinking of, and you actually sort of brought this up a minute ago, but what if Mamoru takes over as head of house? So let's say that Takeru dies, and it's just Mamoru and it's just Misaki. Maybe he takes over as the head of the house and is guided by Misaki in creating a new worldview for Kaigen, one that sees through the propaganda and the government becomes the real war. And maybe the strife with the Ranganese and the Fonyakulu is more of a distraction from the big picture.
Yeah, I mean, they talk about the Emperor, and we haven't even really talked that much about the veil that's pulled over them. I mean, from the Emperor's perspective, we talk about it of their household perspective, but we haven't talked about the Emperor, who's the one holding the veil.
Yeah.
And so I have to imagine that he's got to go down somehow.
He knew something that he didn't share.
Yeah.
I just had a crazy idea. This is different. This
What
is
do you
probably,
got?
what if, so Kwang Chuli, he came in suspiciously
Ruffle
around the
some
time.
feathers.
Well, he also just came in right before a major.
Yeah.
And what did he bring? Telecommunication technology. What if he's a plant? What if he is a Fonyakulu or something? I'm just thinking out loud. Or his dad is or something.
Right.
And let's just, because, he's moved around. He kind of came from nowhere. Nobody knew him. Supposedly he's from Northern Kaigen. But what if that was all a ploy?
Yeah.
And his dad was really, his job was actually get in there, set up those communication towers so that they could pinpoint them, communicate. And then maybe Mamoru finds out about that later, but
I love this theory.
And is crushed, but also had made friends with him. So now maybe, they're able to see through the product of their environments, because Chu Li probably wasn't the one that was, he wasn't the tip of the spear. It's probably his dad and the society, and he's just went along with it because he didn't know any better, but learned to love Mamoru and their culture.
What if Mamoru, following this theory, realizes that Takeru was actually made the right decision to avoid, everybody else?
That could be.
And so he's conflicted the whole time, and then something happens with Kwang, and he's like, you know what? I'm good.
Yeah.
Following the tradition.
Well, I think there's a reason why he's not been reintroduced to the plot. They right when all that went down, I believe it was Takashi that basically said, hey, go up there and make sure the telecommunications are working. We need you to tell the Empire.
Yeah.
And you never hear from him again. And also, I don't remember exactly, but you don't get a lot of dialogue from him. I don't know that he was super shocked by this. I just seem suspicious that right around the time that someone foreign comes in to Takayubi
set up GPS
to set this up, that all of a sudden they get very shortly
after hundreds of years.
Right. And so wouldn't that just be, it would just, I don't know, it just seems seems unlikely.
And I do like the way that Wang writes, is that there's no, aside from Mamoru's, getting the veil pulled over him, there's really not this crazy storyline, and it's all very, baked into the kind of the undertones, and you would never even think that Kwang was bad.
No.
Unless you were in a podcast trying to make predictions.
Yeah, I'm just, you put me in a position where I'm trying to come up with whatever I can. I don't know. I just think if she wants to throw some plot twists at us, that would be an interesting one.
I would love that.
What I will say that I'm liking right now is the shifts between Misaki and Mamoru, and I keep changing his name and how I'm pronouncing it, and it's happening more quickly now that they're under attack.
Right.
And it's going boom. What was once take a full chapter to get to one of their perspectives, now boom, boom,
different
boom,
perspectives
boom.
in a single scene.
In a single scene, and so I'm really loving that, and I'm craving a scene where they get to fight side by side.
Yeah.
And even better if Takeru gets his head out of his ass and also fights.
A little family, Matsuda action.
Family. Yeah. And then I imagine, though, it's going to be dramatic, and then probably Takeru dies in a really right at the point that he has a breakthrough.
Yeah.
I imagine emotionally with his family in whatever way that some guy that's as stoic as him can have a breakthrough. Maybe we have it, and then one of those expert,
kind of like his dad, where he's like, he really should have liked Misaki more.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he probably wishes that he had lived a more authentic life, maybe, to who he was and what he wanted to do with his life.
Yeah.
So And that's a lot of what this book is too, is unrealized dreams.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree with that.
So that's another interesting subplot or like just sub theme that. Look, I was not expecting to like this, if I'm being honest.
I mean, the first 50 pages, man, you're like, oh, what do I get myself into?
I actually didn't have as bad of an experience with it. When you told me the first 50 pages were a drag, I was really concerned with starting, and I was concerned that we'd even have podcast material. To be honest, but that was a little dramatic.
Yeah.
And then it was slow. It certainly got better after that.
Oh, yeah.
So it really picked up, and now. Honestly, if you hadn't have told me that I have to stop at the end of 16, I would have read the rest of the book in 2 days.
The pacing is very good.
So now it's really good. I'm enjoying it. And dude, I think...
Yeah, what's your first half rating?
I think that's everything I got for you. So I thought about this coming in. I kind of want... Could you go first? Because that's our normal
Sure,
order.
yeah.
I don't want to sway you because I really know my rating. And I don't know if have you considered it yet?
Given... all things considered, I'm going to come in at an 8.2.
8.2?
Yeah.
That's a very fair rating. It's a good book. I'm coming in lower only because I think that I really like more complex magic systems where I'm surprised by it, truly. And I've liked... It's just not that I'm upset that she uses... something that is well known with water and fire and stuff like that or anything. It's a very good book, but I really do like more wacky magic systems.
Yeah.
And
in the realm of books that we're reading, this is certainly the least fantastical.
Yeah, it's the least fantastical. That's all it is. Very good writing. I'm going to give it a 7.6.
Okay. All right.
But it's good writing. I'm enjoying it so far. It's really picked up now. Now that the fights are happening and that Misaki is finally being authentic to herself, I don't know what sort of unhinged, beast lies.
Yeah, I'm very excited to see what happens.
And what's funny is where we ended, both Mamoru and Misaki are in dire straits.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I mean, there's zero happiness happening where we've left off.
But I'm excited. I like it. And I think that you don't get a lot of female protagonists like this, you don't get a lot of fantasy books where the protagonist is this housewife where for a while is really boring.
Right.
There was a point where I was like, where could you possibly take this chick? And that was the other screenshot I sent you, actually, if you want me to read it, and then we can be done.
Yeah.
It was ML Wang's blog, and she said, when I first outlined the Sword of Kaigen, I thought I was embarking on a simple novella-length story about a simple mother and her oldest son. However, when I started writing Misaki in her restrictive kimono in the cold halls of her husband's house, I realized that there was a more complex character in that little housewife. That complexity sprang from the sheer contrast between a reckless teenager sprinting across rooftops and a poised mother of 4. My now adult writer's brain recognized that there must have been a period of transition between the spirited teenager and the housewife of infinite patience, and that the transition could not possibly have been painless. Misaki loved her old life, loved fighting, yet she left it behind at the age of 19 to marry a man she didn't love at all. Logically, that decision had to be a source of regret, and the Matsuda family, with their cold aura and repressed emotions, is a place that kind of regret could only fester and grow in silence. So I really love that you have the storm that's coming is inside her. It's an emotional one. So that's an interesting flip, whereas in a more fantastical magic system, it's a war.
Yeah,
or it's some sort of crazy beast that you're actually slaying. This is the beast from within. And it's repressed angst.
Yeah. Yeah, man. That's an insane basis of a fantasy book.
Yeah.
Crazy.
She knocked it out of the park, man. But any lasting thoughts, W?
No, I'm very happy. I'm very excited to read the second half. I imagine I'll probably crank through it pretty quick. And that's kind of it.
Okay.
That's all I got.
Awesome. Good stuff, brother.
All right.